A fishing trawler is alone in the middle of the North Sea, miles from any coast. The crew hauls in their nets, expecting a catch of cod or haddock. But tangled in the mesh is something heavy, dark, and solid. It's the tusk of a woolly mammoth. On another trip, a different boat dredges up a human jawbone, thousands of years old but perfectly preserved. Then, another finds a beautifully crafted flint spearhead. For decades, the floor of the North Sea has been giving up secrets from a different world. Bones of Ice Age animals and tools of ancient humans are being found in a place they could never have survived. This is a cold, violent sea, hundreds of kilometers from shore. So what are these relics of a lost, inhabited land doing at the bottom of it? The first finds were dismissed as curiosities. A mammoth tusk here, a strange bone there. But as the decades passed and fishing technology improved, the trickle of discoveries became a flood. Trawler crews working the rich fishing grounds of the Dogger Bank, an elevated plateau in the middle of the North Sea, were pulling up a menagerie of impossible creatures. The bones weren't just of mammoths, but of woolly rhinos, giant deer with massive antlers, powerful cave lions, and vast herds of reindeer. This wasn't just a random collection of fossils washed out to sea. This was a complete Ice Age ecosystem, perfectly preserved in the cold, dark sediment. And then came the human evidence. Barbed antler points, exquisitely crafted for spearing fish or seals. Flint tools, still sharp after 10,000 years, designed for butchering animals. Polished stone axes, heavy and purposeful. And most haunting of all, human bones. Skulls, jawbones, fragments of skeletons. These were the remains of Mesolithic people, the hunter-gatherers who lived after the great ice sheets retreated. They were found hundreds of kilometers from any modern coastline, in a place where no human could survive for more than a few hours. The fishermen, who knew this sea and its floor better than any scientist, were the first to understand. They realized they were trawling over a lost hunting ground. They gave this phantom landscape a name. Doggerland. It was a place spoken of in port pubs and on the decks of ships, a world known only through the ghosts it gave back to their nets. For a long time, the scientific community struggled to explain it. Could these artifacts have washed out from Europe's major rivers, like the Rhine or the Thames? The evidence didn't fit. The finds were too concentrated, too far from shore, and often found together in ways that suggested they were left right where they fell. Were they lost from ancient boats? Unlikely. These weren't trade goods. They were the everyday tools and remains of a land-based society from a time long before seafaring trade. The sheer volume and consistency of the evidence pointed to a single, staggering conclusion. These bones and tools weren't lost in the sea. They were from a world that existed before the sea. Archaeologists and geologists began to realize that the fishermen's folklore was true. The artifacts hadn't been brought to the water had come to them. They were the last remnants of a completely submerged world, a Stone Age Britain that was once part of the European continent. The answer to the mystery of the North Sea bones lies not in sunken ships or washed-out rivers, but in a fundamental change to the planet itself. The story of Doggerland begins at the end of the last great ice age. 20,000 years ago, Earth looked very different. So much of the world's water was locked up in colossal ice sheets, miles thick, that covered much of North America and Northern Europe. Global sea levels were dramatically lower, about 120 meters, or nearly 400 feet, below where they are today. With the sea held back, the shallow basin between Britain and the continent was not a sea at all. It was dry land. Great Britain was not an island. It was simply the high western peninsula of Europe. The vast, low-lying plain connecting it to what is now Denmark and the Netherlands was Doggerland. And this was no frozen, desolate tundra. As the ice sheets began to melt and retreat northward around 12,000 years ago, life flooded into this newly exposed territory. This was the heartland of Mesolithic Europe. Imagine a landscape of rolling hills, broad, marshy wetlands teeming with birds, and dense woodlands of birch, hazel, and pine. It was a world of immense rivers, a great waterway, a lost ancestor to the modern Thames and Rhine, carved its way south through the center of Doggerland, fed by countless streams and creating a massive freshwater lake at its center before emptying into what we now call the English Channel. This was a paradise for hunter-gatherers. The rivers were choked with fish, the wetlands were home to seals and otters, and the forests were filled with red deer, aurochs, and wild boar. The people who lived here were not struggling survivors on a harsh frontier. They were sophisticated and well-adapted, living in a landscape far richer and more productive than the colder highlands to the north or the drier plains to the south. They crafted fine tools from antler and flint, built seasonal camps along the riverbanks, and hunted the vast herds that migrated across the plains. For thousands of years, Doggerland wasn't a bridge between Britain and Europe. It was the center. But that world is now gone, buried under hundreds of feet of cold, gray water and layers of sediment. If it's all completely invisible, how can we possibly know what it looked like? How can scientists map the course of its ancient rivers, or know which forests grew on its hills? How do you perform archaeology on a landscape you can't see, touch, or even visit? The challenge seemed impossible. How do you excavate a lost continent buried beneath 100 meters of water and thick layers of marine sediment? You can't send divers down with trowels and brushes. The pressure is too immense, the water too dark, the scale too vast. For decades, Doggerland was a ghost, known only by the fragments it offered up to fishing nets. The solution, when it came, arrived from an entirely unexpected direction: the very industry drilling into the North Sea for its modern resources. For over half a century, oil and gas companies have been mapping the seabed in exhaustive detail. They use a technique called seismic reflection. A ship sends powerful sound waves down into the seafloor. These waves travel through the layers of sand, mud, and ancient rock, bouncing back at different speeds depending on the material they hit. By measuring these echoes, supercomputers can build a stunningly detailed 3D image of the geology, sometimes kilometers deep. This data, worth billions of dollars, was created to find oil. But archaeologists realized it contained something far older, a digital ghost preserved in the code. Hidden within these commercial datasets were the faint, unmistakable outlines of Doggerland's topography. It was like getting an MRI scan of a lost world. Suddenly, they could see it all. The winding scars of ancient river valleys, some far larger than any in Britain today. They could trace the gentle slopes of rolling hills and identify the vast, shallow basins that were once freshwater lakes and sprawling marshlands. The phantom landscape was given a skeleton. But this was still just a black and white map. To bring it to life, scientists needed to know what grew on those hills and what swam in those rivers. This required the next crucial step: ground truthing. Using the seismic maps as a guide, research vessels sailed to precise locations and drilled long, narrow cores deep into the seabed. Each core is a vertical timeline, a tube of sediment preserving thousands of years of environmental history. Back in the lab, these cores are sliced open and analyzed with forensic precision. They are time capsules. Microscopic grains of pollen reveal the ancient forests of pine, birch, and hazel. The tiny shells of insects and snails tell of the climate and whether the water was fresh or salty. And in a revolutionary breakthrough, scientists can now extract environmental DNA, minute genetic fragments shed by the creatures that lived there, giving them a species list without ever finding a single bone. By combining the vast, continent-sized seismic maps with the microscopic detail from thousands of these cores, the world of Doggerland was reborn in data. Scientists could now digitally walk through its ancient forests, trace its riverbanks, and watch as the landscape changed over millennia. But this incredible scientific tool did more than just reveal a hunter's paradise. The data also held a precise, chilling record of how it was all taken away. The same science that resurrected Doggerland also chronicled its complete destruction. The same data that allowed us to see Doggerland also contains the precise, chilling record of its death. The end did not come in a single fiery apocalypse. It was a slow, creeping invasion, a war of attrition fought over centuries. As the planet continued to warm and the last great ice sheets melted, the water they released had to go somewhere. It flowed into the oceans, and global sea levels began their relentless rise. For the people of Doggerland, this was a change measured not in days, but in generations. The coastline of their world began to retreat. The great river that once flowed through the heart of their land slowly drowned, its valley widening into a vast, brackish estuary. Salt water poisoned the freshwater marshes. The hunting grounds of their ancestors became tidal flats. Year by year, the sea advanced. They were forced to move, abandoning coastal camps and retreating to the shrinking high ground. By about 8,500 years ago, Doggerland was no longer a contiguous landmass. It had been broken apart by the rising waters into an archipelago, a chain of large, low-lying islands, the last remnants of a drowned continent. The people who remained were now islanders, their world shrinking around them. They were living on borrowed time. And then, the final, catastrophic blow fell. Around 6,200 BC, off the coast of modern-day Norway, a section of the continental shelf the size of Iceland collapsed in a single, monumental event. This was the Storegga Slide, one of the largest landslides known on Earth. It displaced a colossal volume of water, triggering a mega tsunami that raced south across the North Sea basin. Researchers still debate the tsunami's exact impact, but for any people living on the remaining shores of Doggerland, it would have been an unimaginable catastrophe. A wall of water, perhaps 5 meters high or more, would have surged over the low islands, destroying everything in its path. It may not have submerged the islands completely in one go, but it would have rendered them uninhabitable, poisoning the land with salt and sweeping away entire communities. The rising seas were the slow, inevitable process of destruction, but the Storegga tsunami was the brutal, violent end. Within a few generations after the wave hit, the last hilltops of Doggerland, the final peaks of a lost world, vanished beneath the waves. A landscape that had been home to humans for millennia was erased from the map, and eventually, from memory. It became a ghost story, then nothing at all. So why does uncovering this 8,000-year-old tragedy matter to us now? The story of Doggerland is more than a piece of ancient history. It is a message, sent to us from a depth of 8,000 years. Unlike the legends of Atlantis, Doggerland is not a myth. It is a scientifically documented reality, a forensic account of a world's end written in sediment cores and seismic data. It stands today as our clearest, most tangible example of how a changing climate can completely reshape the human world and erase a populated landscape from existence. The loss of this world forces us to confront a profound truth. The maps we trust, the coastlines we see as permanent, are merely a snapshot in geological time. Doggerland shows us that lands central to human culture, places that feel as solid and eternal as our own, can vanish beneath the waves. Its discovery is a powerful, non-preachy reminder of the immense power of natural processes and the fragility of our own coastal communities. The people of Doggerland did not stand by and watch their world drown. They were resourceful and resilient. They adapted. For generations, they retreated from the encroaching sea, moving their camps to higher ground, adjusting their hunting strategies as forests became wetlands and wetlands became estuaries. They lived through a slow-motion crisis, a process of loss that spanned centuries. Their story is a human one, of adaptation and survival, until there was simply nowhere left to go. Today, we are the ones who live on the coastlines. We have built our greatest cities, our centers of trade and culture, at the boundary between land and sea. The story of Doggerland is not a direct prophecy of our future, but it is a stark precedent. It shows that when the fundamental balance of the planet shifts, the consequences are not abstract. They are measured in lost homes, lost territories, and ultimately, lost worlds. The fishermen who first pulled these bones from the sea were recovering more than just fossils. They were finding the echoes of a warning. Doggerland is a lesson written into the seabed itself, a reminder that the world beneath our feet is not guaranteed. It shows us that a thriving civilization can become nothing more than a layer of sediment and a collection of scattered artifacts, waiting to be found by a future that barely remembers it existed. The voices of Doggerland are silent now, but its story, pulled from the darkness, asks us a quiet but urgent question. Are we listening?